Hello. Sunday, I told you something that I think landed differently than most of what we've covered in this series. See, staff don't revert because they're resistant, they revert because the environment kept signaling the old ways were still acceptable. And you, as an owner, control that environment. Today, I want to get specific about what that actually means in practice because the problem with that insight on its own is, while it's true, it doesn't tell you what to do on a Monday morning. So that's what today is. Three specific interventions, things you can implement this week, not concepts but actions. Each one changes the environment in a way that makes the new behavior easier than the old one. Let's get into it. The first intervention is called the 24-hour rule, and here's what it addresses. Right now, when a staff member has a question, the fastest path to the answer is you. You're available, you respond quickly, you give a clear answer. The whole interaction takes 2 minutes. That speed in itself is a problem. Not because being responsive is bad, but because when asking you is faster than the alternative, asking you is always going to win. Every time without a second thought. So the 24-hour rule changes that dynamic without making you unreachable. And here's how it works. Any question that the FAQ or reference card could reasonably cover, you don't answer immediately, you respond within 24 hours. Not never, but 24 hours. And when you respond, you just don't give the answer. You tell them where in the FAQ or reference card the answer lives. And you can ask them to confirm it if they can find it there. That's it. What this does is it makes looking up faster than waiting for you, because 24 hours is a long time when a return is just sitting on your desk waiting to move. Within weeks, 2 weeks of consistent application, staff stop asking questions that the documentation covers because they can find the answer themselves and not because you told them to stop. And match the environment changed. The behavior shifted because the incentive shifted, not because you reminded everyone to follow the protocol. The second one is the ownership debrief, and this is the one about the manager specifically. You're doing spot checks, you're reviewing a sample of what the manager signed off after the fact. That's working, but there's a piece most partners skip, and it's a piece that actually builds the internal standard, the debrief conversation. You see, after a spot check, sit down with the manager for 15 minutes, not to tell them what they got right or got wrong, but to ask them about their reasoning. Walk through a return they signed off on. Ask them what they noticed first, what made them pause, what they almost flagged as an R but decided it wasn't, what they were least certain about when they signed off. Then tell them what you noticed when you reviewed the same return, not as a correction, but as a comparison. Here's what I saw, here's what you saw, here's where we align, here's where we diverge. That conversation does something that no amount of instruction can do. It calibrates judgment, because judgment isn't transferred through rules, it's transferred through comparison. When the manager hears how you think about a specific return or on a specific item, the internal standard adjusts slightly towards yours. And do that conversation like 10 times across 10 different returns, and the manager's judgment is significantly calibrated towards yours. Not perfectly, but close enough that when they sign off it looks like what you'll have done when you've signed off. That judgment, that's when the ownership becomes real, not when the contract was signed, but when the judgment finally aligns. And the debrief is how the judgment aligns. The third intervention is the system improvement meeting. And this is the one most partners skip because it feels like overhead, but it isn't. It's the thing that makes everything else compound. Once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, you and the manager, not to check in how things are going, specifically to improve the system. So 2 questions you lay on the table every time. Ask what situation came up in the last 2 weeks that the FAQ didn't cover, and what's the answer? And what's one part of the checklist or the protocol that's creating friction that doesn't need to exist? The first question builds the FAQ, makes it more complete, shrinks the category of situations that don't have a documented answer. The second question sharpens the tools, makes them easier to use, reduces the friction that causes people to skip steps. And here's why this matters. more than it sounds. Is when a manager is part of building the system, when a manager when a manager in itself is part of building the system, when the observations are what improve it, they stop being users of the system and start being owners of the system. And owners behave differently than users. A user followed the checklist because they were told to do. An owner followed the checklist because they helped design it, because they experience in it, and because when it works, they feel that. So the system improvement meeting creates that ownership, not through a contract, but through participation. And a manager who owns the system is the most powerful reversion prevention mechanism you have, because they're not just using new behavior, they invested in it. Now, let me tell you what ties all these three together. None of them are about telling people what to do. The 24-hour rule doesn't tell staff to use the FAQ, it makes them use the FAQ faster than waiting. The ownership debrief that doesn't tell the manager to develop better judgment. It creates conditions where the judgment develops naturally. The system improvement meeting that doesn't tell the manager to take ownership. It gives them something real to own, and that's the pattern. Every intervention changes what's easy, not what's required. Because here's the truth about behavior change in a professional service firm. People don't do what they are told to do. They do what makes sense given the environment they are operating in. You can write the best system in the world. You can train on it. You can remind people about it. You can hold people accountable to it. And if the environment still makes the old way easier, the old way wins. But when the environment makes the right behavior the natural default, you don't need to remind anyone of anything. The system runs because it was designed to run. That's the difference between a firm that's transformed and a firm that tried to do it. So 3 interventions starting this week. The 24-hour rule. Implement it for the FAQ covered questions today. Tell your team directly. Any questions the documentation covers, you'll respond within 24 hours with a pointer to where it lives. For the ownership brief, at least schedule the first 1 week. Schedule the first one this week. Pick a return the manager signed off on recently, and for 15 minutes, 2 perspectives on the same return. The third one, the system improvement meeting. Put it on a calendar, recurring every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. 30 minutes, 2 questions every time. That's it. Those 3 things running consistently are what turns a 6-day system into a permanent shift. Now, Sunday we go into week 9 and what the firm actually looks like when all of this is working. Not as a concept, as a specific picture of a specific week in a firm that's completed this process. Alright, with that, I will see you on Sunday.